Your market news now. Stocks in Asia struggled for direction as investors awaited readings on U.S. inflation for clues on the Federal Reserve's interest rate path. U.S. data due later in the week will offer further signs of the health of the U.S. economy and the effect of monetary policy. The Federal Reserve's interest rate decision is due next week. Meanwhile, Africa's biggest lender by assets, Standard Bank, reported that its annual profit jumped by 27% as high interest rates helped offset bad loans. Standard Bank said credit impairment charges increased by 22%, which pushed the lender's credit loss ratio, which is a measure of bad loans as a percentage of total loans, up to 98 basis points and close to the upper range of its target of 100 basis points. We're going to have that discussion looking at not only Standard Bank's results, but also Exxaro, that we did have numbers coming out of both companies. But it's quite also interesting to look at the company's share price. And we're going to have that conversation with Simphiwe Letlajane, who is from SABC Investments. Simphiwe, thank you so much for your time. I mean, before we get into those company earnings, market sentiment right now, especially looking at what's driving markets, given the fact that we had that CPI data earlier in the week. What do you make of it?
Afternoon, Nastasia, and thank you for having me on the show. When we are looking at markets in terms of the movements that we are seeing today, we are seeing our local markets slightly in the red, resources, industrials, and financials pulling back. And of course, they did have a slightly positive gain yesterday, so giving back some of those gains. And then when we're looking at the global markets, we did see the S&P 500 close lower yesterday. The Euro Stoxx 50 currently today is trading slightly higher, whilst the UK FTSE 100 is trading low. And of course, markets did, digest that inflation print that did slightly disappoint, as markets were anticipating inflation to come in unchanged, but it edged up slightly to 3.2% year on year in the US. And of course, we will be looking quite keenly to the Fed interest rate decision next week. Markets largely expecting the US Fed to keep interest rates unchanged. But of course, what will be quite key is the guidance that is given by the Fed chair in terms of expectations going forward.
Let's talk about Standard Bank's results. I mean, it's quite interesting to look at that share price down about 4.8%. And despite what looked like a beat in estimates, the share price reaction seems to suggest that a lot has been baked into this price. What do you make of the numbers brought forward?
Certainly, we did see quite a lot of the banks last year in particular doing fairly well. And of course, coming into this year, there has been slight, pullbacks. They're having a bit of a tougher year this year in terms of their start overall when you're looking at the whole sector. And I think markets, of course, beginning to price ahead and just looking at the macro environment and some worsening conditions from a macro economic standpoint. But definitely, when you're looking at Standard Bank, they did deliver quite strong earnings results, definitely outpacing their peers in terms of earnings growth over the year, around 27%, and that was boosted by net interest income as well as non-interest revenue growing by double digits. And when you're looking at it geographically, you can see that the majority of the growth is actually coming from the rest of Africa operations, as they do, of course, went into the rest of Africa.
Unfortunately, we seem to be having those technical issues with Simphiwe, but he did mention there, talking about where majority of the growth was coming from when it comes to Standard Bank's earnings, 49% being driven by the Africa regions. But he's back with us. Simphiwe, let's pick up on that point in terms of where that Africa growth is. Fortunately, we'll try and get Simphiwe back a little bit in a short bit and see if we can get reestablished that internet connection. But building on what he's just said, some of the analysts raising questions about the Africa regions, and given the fact that majority of those earnings are being driven by what's going on in that market, some have brought in the issue of the currency headwinds that some of the Africa regions have been experiencing, wondering if perhaps this could be a risk for Standard Bank. But we'll have that conversation much later on in the afternoon, where I will be in conversation with Sim Chabalala, who is the CEO of Standard Bank. But nonetheless, we also had another company, mining company, out with earnings, and that share price up over 3.25%, and that was most likely driven by the fact that they have declared a special dividend. Simpiwe is back with us. Simpiwe, unfortunately, we lost you when you were responding around the growth of the Africa regions and the contribution they made to Standard Bank's earnings.
100%. So when you do look at the earnings, they were fairly aggressive in terms of pursuing growth in the African region. Of course, a fairly undeveloped African market as far as financial services are concerned. So offering quite a lot of growth opportunity. But what is also quite important from Standard Bank strategy.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to take a quick ad break, and that was Simpiwe Litlojana from ABSA Investments talking to us about what he thought of ABSA's results with that share price down 4.8%. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have more news for you.